My name is Dot Porter. I am the curator for Digital Research Services in the Kislak Center for Special Collections, Rare Books and Manuscripts. I split my time with the Schoenberg Institute for Manuscript Studies, which is a sort of research and development group that focuses on manuscript studies broadly defined. We do a lot of digital work. My name implies, my title implies I do a lot of digital work. But I also love working with the collections. And one of my favorite things to do is on Wednesdays at noon, I host Coffee with a Codex, where we take one or sometimes two manuscripts off the shelves and show them to you in a informal 30 minutes. We're just taking a look. I am very interested in manuscripts as a thing. We have a lot of different kinds of manuscripts in our collection. We actually do have a fair number of sort of scientific and medical manuscripts, and that's what we're going to be talking about today. But I am not a historian of science or a medical expert. What I do have is access to some pretty neat manuscripts about medicine. And if you take a look at the links, which Amy, can you repost the links, please, for me? Thank you, in the chat. So what we're going to be talking about today is two manuscripts, one of which is a recent acquisition. So I think we just purchased it last month. And Amy, who is our manuscripts cataloging librarian, did the cataloging work and got it up. It hasn't been digitized yet. So when I show it to you under the camera, that's going to be sort of the first look from this manuscript since it's been at Penn, although it's not an unknown manuscript. It's a known manuscript and the texts are known, but it's new to us. The other manuscript that we're going to be looking at is this manuscript right here. This is LJS 195, which we have owned for a while. I was just looking at the provenance, and I think we purchased it. When did we purchase this thing? So this is an LJS manuscript. So it was actually given to us by Larry Schoenberg, put on deposit. So it's on deposit since 2012. So the provenance for this is pretty interesting. It was owned by Ulricus Fugger, who was it was part of a German family collection that collected manuscripts and early printed books for a very long time. And in fact, part of their collection forms the background of the Austrian National Library in Vienna. So this was a very important family, and they apparently owned this manuscript up until the 1990s, at which point it was sold in auction at Sotheby's, and it went through a few different hands. Larry Schoenberg purchased it in 1997, and then he put it on deposit with us in 2012. So that's the sort of brief story of how we got our hands on this manuscript. So let's take a look. It's a pretty typical collection of medical recipes and sort of various texts. There's also, in the back, there's a section of recipes on how to make ink. So, and this is something that you see sort of a lot of recipe books, where it's different types of things that are mixed together here. The cover is a parchment binding, reusing some sort of existing parchment. So they had this old book and they didn't need it anymore, so let's use it to make a binding. Another very typical sort of thing. The texts are mostly written in German in a sort of, we'll take a look here. There's a lot of blank leaves at the front, and then we get the text. The first leaf is missing. So if you see here, we start numbering with number 2. So page 1 is missing, and I had a look at the collation, which is how the book is sort of put together. That is the sheets that were folded to make the quires or gatherings that were sewn together. And I took a look at this. it's particularly interesting for books like this, and I say books like this, it's a book that contains a lot of different texts, a lot of different types of texts, and that's written in different hands, which one way that this happens is if you have people writing on different gatherings, and then later they're sort of compiled and sewn together and made into a book, as opposed to a book that where somebody had the idea, I am going to write a book, and then they write the book all the way through. It's just a different way of making a book. And so it's interesting to look and see if the physical structure of the book aligns with the texts, right? Because if each text is written on a separate choir or a separate set of choirs in a different hand, this could imply that they were written by different people over time, and then somebody compiled them. I did a little bit of this work this morning. It doesn't look like anyone else has done this. If this sounds interesting to you, I invite you to come in, please, and take a look. What I did find is that the collation formula that's in the record is not exactly correct. And so I'm going to be looking at this a little bit more to see if I can fix it. It's a little difficult because the binding is quite tight. You can see here when the binding is a little bit looser, it's sort of easier to see down in the binding. I found some thread, but it was a little difficult to tell when thread in the gutter. That will tell you that you're in the middle of a choir. That's why I'm looking for thread. It will say I'm in the middle of one of these gatherings. It's a little harder to tell where choirs end and begin. But I think I did, if we get to it, there was an instance where there is a new text in a different hand, definitely starting in the middle of a choir, and hopefully we'll get to that. Let's see, there are, as I mentioned, it's written in different hands. You even have on this page, there's I'm not sure if this is, I think this might actually have been added later. This is a slightly different hand. It's written a little bit smaller. And it looks like this is the end of a text. And then here's another text starting at the top of the page. And it may have been that there was blank space and somebody came and filled it in. This is another pretty typical thing that you'll see. Oh, right. Jim in the chat is asking about the red ink entries. Yeah, I think it's going to be some kind of heading or some kind of, so here we go. This is another instance. This actually, I was able to figure that this first part is a separate choir. And then there's this blank leaf here. And then a new text starts on a new choir. And here you have the red is a heading. And then you have sort of subheadings. And then at the beginnings of sentences as well, you have red ink that's been put in. And this is basically, I mean, the headings and subheadings are to help you know what's happening in the sections here. And then these are sort of, it's just to sort of help your eye as you're reading. So you know that you're sort of moving through the text. The red will help you with that. There are two sets of numbering. So it sort of starts actually right here. There's red numbers that run through, and then there's later numbers added in sort of a gray ink. I think that's ink, it might be pencil, but that's later, and they're different, which makes things a little bit interesting. So here, this is 28 and this is 30, and they get off, which is part of what makes figuring the collation a little bit complicated. It gets off. And Amy mentioned that the addition of the red will vary depending on who wrote the sections. And this is true. So there was a section, I'll just keep paging through because what you really want to do is see that. Oop, here's another one. Here's another bit that's been added. added later, I think, at the bottom. Somebody really filled this up. They really, really wanted to fill this up. But as we move through, I think you will see that there are the different, and in fact, it's one of the ways that you can differentiate between the scribes, that they use their rubrication a little bit differently. So there's a question from Becky asking if there are any diagrams or charts in the manuscript. There are not. Well, there are a couple. So there are a couple of sort of text. I'll keep moving through. There aren't drawings. So if you look at the links, Amy, can you post the links in again? Because I think people keep coming in. But I provided links to a couple of other manuscripts that we have that are also medical manuscripts and which are also German. So this is a German medical manuscript from the 15th century, and the LJS 449 and LJS 463, also Schoenberg collection manuscripts. And if you take a look at those, they are also medical, but they look different from this one. They're bigger, and they have more drawings in them. They seem to be sort of more, they were more sort of planned and complete. They're also medical. We describe them in our catalog as medical and astronomical miscellanies, which was something that you would see quite a lot, actually. Is that so? This book, from what I can tell in the description, it contains. Let me find the description of the. Oh, I'm gonna want to look at the record, and you can also look at the record. It is a medical compilation with a particular focus on the plague, but also includes information on diseases of different parts of the body, urine, medicines, laxatives, water and wine, and then, as I mentioned before, the making of pigments for painting and inks at the end. So the medical and astronomical miscellany will include that as well, but there's also a lot about sort of the astrological connection. So there was this belief that, in order to, there were sort of two things that medieval doctors would do when they were testing you. One is when they were sort of examining you. One is that they would do your star chart reading to see what's going on in your zodiac. And then they would also test your urine. And if you look at those LJS 449 and LJS 463, they both have a lot of diagrams and illustrations actually relating to the zodiac and to urine, what was called uroscopy, or like examination of the urine. This book does not have those. The reason that I have this open to this page is because you can see we have one text ending and another one beginning. The ink is different. I think that it's a little hard to tell, but I think the hand is different. And this is happening in the middle of a choir. So this is not an instance where you have one person wrote this and then another person wrote this and they bound them together. It seems to be that this was sort of continuous writing in one choir. But no diagrams, I'm afraid. Stephen is asking about the pages being cut down from larger leaves. So it does look like it's been trimmed. If you look, I just turned to this page, it looks like there's text at the top that might have been trimmed there. And I think that it's very likely, yes, that this was trimmed down from a slightly larger book. Although, the binding, so there's nothing in the record about when the binding itself was made. It is a 15th century liturgical manuscript. So the manuscript that the binding is made of is contemporaneous with the book itself. But so it was probably made later, which means it's likely that the book was trimmed. Here's a chart. And this is actually, here's another one that's been added. So, you know, clearly this is different ink. And again, it looks like there's a little section and then there's another section starting. And so there was blank space there. I haven't looked, so Lewis is asking about watermarks. I haven't looked at for watermarks. Let me see if the record says anything about watermarks. I don't remember seeing watermarks. Nothing. I haven't looked at them and the record doesn't say anything about them. So looking for what that watermarks could be helpful to figure that out. Let's see. It looks, and then on to Stephen's, the second part of Stephen's question, it looks pretty tidy, not like something in frequent practical use. It does, you know, a lot of times we look at manuscripts here and we see a lot of sort of notes in the margin, and there seem to be a lot of sort of texts added. If there's space, there's stuff that's added there. But it seems to be more like additional text as opposed to notes on what's there. Although here, you know, there are notes here in the margin that have been trimmed away, but that might just be this section. There are certainly sections that don't have any notes in the margin. So that's, and the notes in the margin may actually have been written by the scribe. So it may have been part of the copying process and not something that came along and was added later. Ooh, look at that. That is that's a nice hand right there. I was not expecting that. I did want to point out some of the texts that are here. Where did you go? So there is the section beginning on folio 27 is the section on the plague. And since I mentioned that specifically in the call, let's take a look at that, at the plague. So that's 26. So here it is, the main, and this is, again, this is a separate choir. And so this has been a separate one. Apparently this is a longer text and it's the, it says this book speaks about the 6-day epidemic, the 6-day epidemic, or the pestilence, the plague. This is written in German, by the way. Most of the texts are in German. A couple of them are in Latin. So we have texts on the plague, and there's a section on baths on 46. So let's take a look at the section on baths. I think it's LJS 463, there's actually a very nice illustration of a couple of people taking a bath together. So bathing, you know, the Middle Ages gets this reputation for not, you know, for people being dirty, but people did bathe. Oh, it's this one. Oh, that's interesting. The text on baths is, we looked at this before because this is the one that starts in the middle, and I think the ink is not as nice on this one. So this is the one on the baths. Let's see, Winston Black, folio 61 verso, that part of a recipe has been aggressively crossed out. Let's take a look. 61 verso, let's see, 81, 61. And Becky suggests it might be a charm. It might be a charm, because there are, you know, charms, I think, probably in here. Let's see, 61. That's 61. See, this is where the numbering, because now we're off by 8. We're at 60 and 68, and that is just a little bit too far off for me. 66. Oh, that's neat. Sort of a different listing. All right, I think I'm almost there. There we go. Yep. Here we have one that's been crossed out. I don't know. Some kind of censorship probably makes sense, or I don't know what. Augury. Oh, I don't know. If somebody wants to try reading this, it's on 61 Verso and seeing eye treatments. Huh. Yep, maybe they tried it and it didn't work. I don't know if they would have scraped it out for that reason, but that's an interesting find there. So there's a lot. This is a very, as you can see, this is a really thick little book. But I do want to take a few minutes before we run out of time to take a look at our new book. It's a lot smaller, and it's actually, I've been talking sort of throughout about this practice of making how people would sort of make individual choirs and then bind them together. And this is an example of a single choir that was made and wasn't, I mean, as far as we know, it wasn't bound with anything else. We have it sort of by itself here. So this is, what is the number here? MS Codex 2074. I mentioned that it is a new, brand new book, and it is French, not German, although it's also from the 15th century. This is from the sort of the first half of the 15th century. And the one that we were just looking at is from the second half. So same century, France. The writing's a little bit easier to read, I find it. It is written in Latin. And this is also, it's a collection of advice and prescriptions for the plague, likely abridged from other manuscript sources. The recommendations address diet, exertion, avoiding public gatherings, and bloodletting, of course. There are some, if you look at those other ones, 449 and 463, you'll find some illustrations of bloodletting, both charts to show you where to let the blood out. And also there's sort of a drawing of a woman having her blood let, which is sort of interesting. So this was pretty typical advice. So it's only six leaves, so it's quite a short little thing. We have contra impedimiam. We have de regimina fructuum, and so different regimens to follow here. And these lovely, I love these initials here with the sort of ribbons around them there. Different advices to follow. There's another one. Oh, it's actually really pretty, even though it seems to have had some water damage at some point. So if you got plague, you could get yourself this little text, and maybe it would help. Yeah, so Amy in the chat has said, if there are any medical historians listening, I'd be very interested in anything you can tell me about the use of the term impedimiam as opposed to epidemiam. Sorry, I'm not speaking very well today. But this is, was it the other term used? Because I know, Amy, that there was another similar text that you looked at. Is that the term that was used in the other text?
In most of the other manuscripts that I could find, epidemium was the term. And so I wonder if it's a regional variant or a term used by a particular school of thought, or just what it might be about.
Okay. Winston says that a quick search on that specific spelling shows that it to be a common variant of epidemia. So it could, in 15th century France. So it could just be a spelling variant.
Yeah, no, definitely. But I'm happy to know that it's French, since that goes along with the other things that we say about this manuscript.
Yeah, it definitely looks, I mean, it looks French to me. The writing is very, you know, French. And these initials, I think it's so interesting that the scribe sort of took the time to make these sort of they're not colorful, but they're really delicate. That they sort of took the time to do this for, you know, what I guess is a practical, you know, a practical little text like this. But I'm sort of constantly surprised at what you find and how scribes decorated texts that you wouldn't always assume that they would. Like there's another one I haven't mentioned yet, the LJS 24, which is another medical miscellany from France, 14th century France. And that one has some really lovely illuminated initials. So it was a Dominican, it was written, I think, for Dominicans who were studying medicine at university, which is a sort of a whole other, you know, thinking about medicine in the Middle Ages, you have sort of the folk medicine, and then you have people studying it at the great universities, usually, and I think in Italy to begin, and then in Paris. But that one has some really neat sort of bedside illustrations of doctors at the bedside doing their work. So pretty fascinating stuff. So this is both of these manuscripts are in this sort of milieu, sort of various across, you know, different in different parts of Europe, and with influences, you know, from ancient Greece through the Middle East, and translated from Greek to Arabic to Latin, but sort of constant. And then here in France in the 15th century. All right, it is now 12:30. So that's our stop time. Thank you so much for coming in to see these. We'll be back next week, and we'll be looking at a couple of Bibles. Actually, it's one Bible, but it's in two different sections. So that should be pretty interesting. Thank you so much, and we'll see you next week.